A mid-level yakuza, Yoshifumi Nitta, relaxes at home when a large metal pod drops onto his head out of nowhere. After hitting a switch on the block, a naked girl emerges from the pod. Remembering nothing else except her name, Hina, she uses psychokinesis to threaten Nitta into buying her clothes and toys. Nitta soon realizes that he's become her de facto guardian. When Hina asks to enter school, Nitta offers to enter her in a nearby school if she stops using her powers. After an awkward introduction, Hina settles into her new school. However, her power builds up too much and ends up exploding inside Nitta's apartment. Later, Nitta makes use of her powers to clear off a plot of land for his company. After the job is over, Nitta is called in by his yakuza boss to take revenge on a rival group. He accidentally convinces Hina to do the job for him, and she uses her powers to wipe out the entire enemy office by herself. A blonde girl emerges from a similar pod as Hina single-handedly taking down a street gang and stealing their leader's clothes. Nitta accidentally runs into her at a ramen shop and finds out that she has the same powers as Hina. With help from local homeless contacts, Nitta tracks down the girl, Anzu, and uses Hina to subdue her without further damage. Hina offers to hang out with Anzu one last time before she returns to the future, and the two stay over at Nitta's apartment. After saying goodbye, Anzu finds she can't return to her original time. Later, Nitta finds out that his favorite women have stopped asking him out as word has gotten out that he has a daughter, Hina. Annoyed at this shift, he starts going out more while leaving Hina with a can of mackerel for dinner. Hina, growing suspicious, asks her classmate Hitomi for help tracking him down, but keeps getting distracted. Hina ends up asking Utako for advice while Hitomi is accidentally pressed into service as a bartender by a drunken man. Utako and Hina return to the bar to find Hitomi serving drinks for multiple customers, including Nitta. The group then heads together to a nearby cabaret club and parties hard. The next morning, Nitta awakes to find a large invoice from the club. Anzu finds herself hunted down by local shopkeepers for her shoplifting of food. A homeless man helps her escape her pursuers and teaches her how to live honestly at a local homeless encampment. Nitta stumbles across Anzu picking up cans for change, and offers her 40,000 yen. She rejects it at first, but then accepts it, hoping to help out a few fellow homeless. However, Utako and the local shopkeepers catch her, and they take most of the money for the stolen goods. At night, Hitomi secretly works as a bartender after being blackmailed by Utako. However, the bar's patrons have taken a liking to her drinks, including Hitomi's homeroom teacher and vice principal. Meanwhile, Nitta remarks that he'd love to have Anzu and Hina switch places sometime. The next day, Hina tries to clean the apartment to avoid her nightmare scenario, but her carelessness makes things worse. Upon finding his apartment trashed, Nitta disowns Hina and kicks her out. Hina blows through all of her money and ends up spending the night with Anzu at her shack, but soon exhausts her patience as well until Anzu kicks her out 3 days later. Meanwhile, Utako and the rest of her regulars at the bar kick Nitta out for supposedly abandoning his daughter. Alone and lost, Hina is inspired by a local indie rock band to use her powers for street magic, and also helps the band explode in popularity. However, she decides to take her earnings with the group and leaves to buy Nitta a new vase as a peace offering. Later, Hitomi ends another day of bartending when she helps Anzu take in empty cans and is introduced to her homeless lifestyle in return. Hitomi tries to keep up with the upbeat Anzu, but falls asleep standing up. Anzu tries to find old TVs to sell to another homeless man. After striking out on a cart full of old CRT TVs, Anzu gets a reluctant Hina and Hitomi to help her. Hitomi gets caught by a policeman while Hina asks Nitta for money to buy one. Eventually, the two manage to sell a TV each, with Anzu revealing that she wanted the money to buy a video game to play with Hina. Later, Hitomi's classmates spot Hitomi and then her homeroom teacher heading into a local bar. After gathering Hina and another friend of Hitomi, the kids try to find out the truth. After failed attempts to interrogate her at school, the group tails her to the bar and Aizawa gets her to confess to being a bartender in increasingly higher tones. Nitta gets called back home by his mother and sister to pay respects to his late father. However, after Hina answers the phone, Nitta comes up with an increasingly complex lie to explain her presence. While drinking with his family, Nitta lets slip the time he kicked Hina out of his home, and decides to admit that Hina is his daughter. Meanwhile, the homeless encampment is about to be demolished by the local government. Anzu tries to rally her fellow homeless, but none of them wish to fight a losing battle. Instead, they tearfully leave her with Utako, who then leaves her to the Hayashi family, who owns Chinese restaurant Rai-Raken. Remembering her old friends and their lessons, Anzu decides to work at Rai-Raken with her new family. Anzu adjusts to the culture shock of her new home and work at the restaurant, as she keeps falling back on her habits within the homeless camp. Later, Hina is tired of getting yelled at by the teachers for sleeping in class. After talking with Nitta, Hina decides to run for student council president, with her only goals of being allowed to sleep and eat more at school. Nitta's Oyabun finds it endearing and gets his lawyer to write Hina's speech for her, which she then repeats verbatim. Being only a first year, Hina is chosen as secretary instead, but she never attends a single meeting, so Hitomi is pressed into service instead. Nitta tries to invite Utako out, but she refuses to leave her bar. Later, Hina and Hitomi get Utako to reluctantly agree to a date with Nitta. However, Nitta accidentally breaks Hina's foot while celebrating. Hina tells Nitta to go on the date anyway, and then Utako rejects him, thinking that he's too attached to caring for Hina. Kei Ikaruga, the security chief of the mysterious organization, meets with Anzu in the present day to observe Hina and determine if she has improved after causing massive destruction in their original timeline. To Kei's shock, Hina passes her checklist, and Kei is dismayed to find out that Hina must be returned to her own time after doing so. One day, Hina's classmate, Mami Shinjo, sees Hina using her telekinesis to throw away trash, and tries to learn the secrets of using psychic powers herself. Hina humors her for a couple days, using her own powers to make Mami feel accomplished, but Mami humiliates herself when she tries to demonstrate her powers in class without Hina's help. Finally, Kei talks to Hina directly, telling her that they will travel back to their original time in 3 days. After struggling to tell Nitta, Hina finally tells him and is treated to her favorite food before leaving. However, she discovers she cannot return after Nitta threw her original pod ball away. Hina returns to Nitta's apartment, only to find him in the middle of celebrating his new freedom. Kei decides to summon Mao from her organization to bring an extra transport pod to pick up Hina, but Mao drops on a deserted island and accidentally loses both her orb and her spare in the surf. After searching for the orbs with no luck, Mao creates puppet versions of Hina and Anzu to talk to while enjoying her time on the island. Months later, she breaks down and tosses them away, before creating a makeshift raft and sailing away. Meanwhile, Nitta tries to arrange for his boss to be the next head of the family. After Hina suggests that Nitta should be the new leader, the Oyabun indulges her for a moment before Nitta steers it back to Kiyoshi. However, Sabu already texted Kiyoshi about the first part of their conversation, which leads him to bury Nitta in cement until the Oyabun himself has to clear it up. Kiyoshi awkwardly decides to name Nitta a lieutenant while he's still buried in cement. Later, Hina asks everyone how to celebrate Nitta's promotion. However, when Nitta gets home, he discovers to his horror that what Hina has set up looks more like a funeral. Utako, wanting to keep her bar's moneymaker, persuades Hitomi into renting an apartment on her own, and then steers her towards various temp jobs to pay for it. The stress of so much work builds up to the point where Hitomi collapses in the doorway of her apartment. As Utako and her regulars throw a housewarming party at Hitomi's place, Hitomi invites her mother to sabotage the arrangement and help her return to a normal life. But instead, her mother is pleased that Hitomi has made so many connections with various companies and approves, leaving Hitomi without an out. Meanwhile, Anzu gets 5,000 yen from her parents in allowance. While shopping with Hitomi, Anzu settles on a shoulder massaging device for her parents, but is short of the required money. When Sabu appears and takes her to a local horse race track, Anzu wins the bet on her first race, but then loses her money on the rest of them. Returning home, Anzu gives her parents a personal shoulder massage instead. A video journalist interviews Nitta in hopes of getting a scoop on modern-day yakuza. Unfortunately, Nitta is a lot nicer than he expected, forcing the journalist to edit and outright fabricate parts of the interview to make Nitta seem more evil. The fake TV special embarrasses Nitta in front of his yakuza boss. Later, while Hina is out on a ski trip with her class, Anzu stays with Nitta. After getting jealous of Anzu's upbeat attitude, Nitta tries to spoil her and drag her down to Hina's level. However, Anzu's demeanor becomes too much for Nitta, and he instead starts seeing Anzu as the perfect daughter. The streak is unfortunately ended the next day, as Anzu has to return home. After she leaves, Nitta receives a call that Hina went missing in the mountains during the skiing trip. Hina is lost in the mountains with Hitomi and 2 other classmates. After building an igloo, Hina tries to prove that she can use her powers to help out, but runs out of energy after going hungry. The next morning, the group tries to feed Hina some pretend ikura sushi with snow to raise her spirits. Eventually, a rescue crew finds them after Hina uses her powers to make a giant ikura sushi sculpture out of snow. The show returns to the present 3 years later, where Mao is the top student at a Chinese Qigong school of superhuman martial arts, while a Japanese street rocker tries to learn how to recreate Hina's Rakugen stunt from before. After meeting at a tea house, Mao and the rocker both think that the other person is insane. When the rocker mentions Hina's name, Mao decides to travel back to Japan with him, but the other members of the school try to stop them both. After a big fight, the Sifu of the school tries to use an unfair trial to convince her to stay, but Mao subtly uses her powers to beat it. The Sifu reluctantly allows her to leave Japan to create more branches of the school, while Mao looks forward to meeting her colleagues in the future. And that's the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading a lot of videos just like this, so I'll see you